They say money doesn't change people. It only reveals who they truly are. I learned that truth in the most brutal way imaginable, watching my sister plan her $250,000 wedding while my own daughter's life hung by a thread. You know how they say money doesn't change people, it just reveals who they really are? For the longest time, I thought that was just something people without money said to make themselves feel better. But then I watched my sister, Jessica, plan her wedding, and I understood. I understood it in a way that carved a permanent hole in my soul. My relationship with Jessica was always complicated. We were sisters, 2 years apart, but we might as well have been born on different planets. I was the quiet, bookish one who became a first-grade teacher and a single mom. She was the dazzling social butterfly who married rich, or rather was about to marry rich. Her fiancé, Mark, was a hedge fund guy with a jawline you could cut glass on and the emotional range of a granite countertop. Their life was a whirlwind of things I only saw in magazines. Weekend trips to Aspen, dinners at restaurants that didn't have prices on the menu, and of course, the wedding. The wedding wasn't just a wedding, it was a production, a multi-day event in Napa Valley with a price tag that made my head spin. $250,000. I know the exact number because Jessica mentioned it. A lot. She'd call me, not to ask how I was or how my 9-year-old daughter, Lily, was doing, but to debate the merits of imported French lace versus Italian silk, or to complain that the calligrapher was charging an obscene amount to hand-letter 200 invitations. Each time she dropped the total cost, it was like a casual flex, a reminder of the chasm that had opened up between our lives. I'd listen, murmur the right things, and then hang up and stare at the pile of bills on my kitchen table, my heart heavy with a quiet, simmering resentment I was ashamed to admit I felt. Then, everything changed. It started subtly. Lily, my bright, energetic whirlwind of a daughter, started getting tired. Not just end of the school day, tired, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that stole the light from her eyes. Then came the bruises, strange purple-splotched maps that would appear on her legs and arms with no explanation. I told myself she was just a clumsy kid, but a cold dread was beginning to coil in my stomach. The dread turned to ice when the school nurse called. Lily had a nosebleed that wouldn't stop for almost an hour. The weeks that followed were a blur of doctors' offices, sterile hallways, and the terrifying silence of waiting rooms. Finally, we were sitting in a small beige office across from a kind-faced oncologist who used a lot of long, complicated words, but I only heard a few of them. Aplastic anemia, bone marrow failure, aggressive. The treatment he recommended was new, a targeted immunotherapy that wasn't fully covered by my teacher's insurance. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an estimate for the out-of-pocket costs. $50,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. $50,000 might as well have been $5 million. It was a number so impossibly large, so far beyond my reality, that I couldn't even process it. I held Lily's small hand, her fingers cold in mine, and all I could do was nod as the doctor explained the urgency, the timeline, the terrifyingly low odds if we did nothing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my laptop frantically searching for grants, charities, clinical trials, anything. I started a GoFundMe, my fingers trembling with shame as I typed out the story of my daughter's illness for the world to see. It raised a few $1,000s from kind friends and strangers, but it was a drop in the ocean. I looked at selling my car, taking out a second mortgage on my tiny house. Every option led to a dead end that wouldn't get me even close to the total. And all the while the clock was ticking. Lily was getting paler, weaker. Finally, after a week of pure desperation, I did the one thing I swore I would never do. I called Jessica. I caught her in the middle of a cake tasting. I could hear Mark in the background making a joke about buttercream. "Oh, hey Sarah," she said, her voice distracted. "Is everything okay? You sound weird." I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat like shards of glass. I told her everything. The diagnosis, the prognosis, the soul-crushing cost of the treatment that could save Lily's life. I didn't even get to the part where I asked for the money before she cut me off. "Oh my God, Sarah, that's just awful. Poor Lily." There was a pause. I could hear her whispering to Mark. Then she came back on the line, her voice changed. It was cooler now, more distant. "Listen, Mark and we just feel terrible, but the timing is just, it's impossible." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean, the timing is impossible?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Well, the wedding," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Every single penny is allocated, Sarah. the caterer, the florist, the 10-piece band from LA. The deposits are all non-refundable. We're talking about $250,000 here. 50,000. It's a huge amount of money. We can't just pull that out of thin air. It would mean canceling things, downgrading. It would ruin everything we've planned. I was speechless. I literally could not form a word. Ruin everything. My daughter, her niece, was dying, and she was worried about downgrading her floral arrangements. Jessica, I finally choked out. This is Lily's life we're talking about. I heard Mark's voice, clear and cold, in the background. Tell her we'll donate to the GoFundMe, Jess. Jessica's voice came back, falsely bright. Mark's right. We can definitely make a donation, and we'll keep Lily in our thoughts, of course. We'll pray for her. And then she had to go. The pastry chef was waiting. She hung up. I sat there, holding the dead phone, the silence in my apartment screaming louder than any sound I had ever heard. A donation. They would make a donation. A few days later, a notification popped up on my GoFundMe page. Jessica and Mark have donated $500. $500. The price of one of her wedding centerpieces. I cried for 2 days straight. I felt a despair so profound I thought it might actually kill me. But then, looking at Lily's sleeping face, her breathing shallow, I knew I couldn't give up. I had to fight for her, even if I was fighting alone. I started selling everything of value I owned. My mother's jewelry, my laptop, my furniture. I took on every tutoring job and weekend shift I could find. It was hopeless, but I had to do something. A week after that devastating phone call, I came home late from a shift, my body aching and my mind numb. There was a thick, cream-colored envelope in my mail slot. It felt heavy, expensive. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside, printed on cardstock that probably cost more than my weekly groceries, was the official invitation to Jessica and Mark's wedding. The script was gold foil, shimmering under my dim kitchen light. And tucked inside, on a separate, smaller card, was a handwritten note from my sister. I unfolded it, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a note of apology. It wasn't an offer of help. It was just 5 simple, elegantly calligraphed words that shattered what was left of my heart. It said, "Please RSVP by the 15th. I stared at the invitation, the thick cardstock cool and heavy in my trembling hands. Gold foil. Of course it was gold foil. It was a perfect, glittering symbol of their world, a world where $250,000 was something to be spent on a party, while in my world, 1/5 of that amount was the price of my daughter's life. Please RSVP by the 15th. It wasn't just a note, it was a dismissal. It was Jessica closing the door, locking it, and then sliding a polite, socially acceptable request under it, as if we were just distant cousins she had to invite out of obligation. As if I hadn't just begged her, with tears streaming down my face, to help save her niece. A hot, white rage, hotter than any grief or despair I had felt, surged through me. I snatched my phone from the counter, my fingers fumbling as I stabbed at her name. She answered on the second ring, her voice a little breathless and giddy. The tasting was divine. We went with the passion fruit and white chocolate. Mark said, "How dare you?" I snarled, the words tearing from my throat. The silence on the other end was immediate. "Excuse me." Jessica's voice was suddenly frosted over. "The invitation, Jessica. The note. Are you actually for real? Do you have any idea what that felt like? To open that piece of paper after you told me my dying daughter wasn't as important as your canapes?" "Okay, Sarah, you need to calm down," she said, her tone condescendingly therapeutic. "You're being hysterical. Of course we sent you an invitation. You're my sister. It would be weird if we didn't. And the caterer needs a final head count for the plated dinner. It's protocol." Protocol. She said the word protocol while my daughter was upstairs, too weak to finish her own dinner. Protocol? I laughed, a raw, ugly sound that didn't feel like my own. Lily is having blood transfusions 3 times a week. Her hair is starting to fall out. She sleeps 16 hours a day. That is my protocol, Jessica. And you're talking to me about a head count for your filet mignon? I heard Mark's low murmur in the background. Jessica's voice became firmer, echoing his steel. Listen, we feel for you. We really do. But this is our wedding. This is supposed to be the happiest time of our lives, and frankly, you're trying to ruin it with all this negativity. We made a donation. We've done what we can. It's not our fault that you don't have better insurance or a bigger savings account. The cruelty of that statement struck me with the force of a physical blow. I had no savings because I'd spent every last penny on fertility treatments to have Lily in the first place, after the doctors told me I'd never conceive. Jessica knew that. She'd been there. She'd held my hand through the failures. How could she throw that back in my face? I can't talk to you anymore, I whispered, my voice breaking. You're not the person I thought you were. Fine, she snapped. But the offer still stands. Just let the wedding planner know your meal choice when you RSVP. She hung up. The days that followed were the darkest yet. Lily had a bad reaction to a transfusion. Her fever spiked to 104, and we spent 2 terrifying nights in the hospital. I sat by her bed, watching the rhythmic beep of the machines, holding her limp hand, and feeling a piece of my own soul wither and die every time she whimpered in her sleep. I looked at my beautiful, funny, vibrant little girl, and all I could see was her fading away. The doctors were gentle but firm. The immunotherapy wasn't working as well as they'd hoped. The aplastic anemia was too aggressive. They sat me down in that same beige office, and the oncologist, Dr. Evans, put his hands together on his desk. Sarah, he said, his eyes full of a sympathy I couldn't bear to look at. It's time to talk seriously about a bone marrow transplant. He explained the process, the risks, the brutal chemotherapy she'd have to endure beforehand to wipe out her existing marrow. But it was her only real shot at a cure. We've been searching the National Registry since her diagnosis, he continued, but Lily has a somewhat rare HLA type. We haven't found a perfect 10 out of 10 match. Hope, which had been a flickering candle flame, was extinguished. I felt the floor drop out from under me. So what does that mean? I asked, my voice hollow. It means we need to look closer to home, he said. The best chance for a match is always a full biological sibling. He paused, looking at her chart. Lily is an only child, correct? I nodded, unable to speak. Okay, well, parents are always a half match. We've already tested you. But other close relatives, aunts, uncles, they can sometimes be the miracle we're looking for. A full match from a relative is the best-case scenario. The gold standard. I thought of the gold foil invitation sitting on my counter at home, a cruel monument to my sister's priorities. I almost laughed. A miracle from Jessica. It was impossible. She wouldn't even sacrifice her champagne budget for Lily, let alone endure a medical procedure. The whole idea was a bitter, pointless joke. I was about to tell Dr. Evans not to even bother, that my sister wasn't an option, when he looked up from his computer screen, his expression serious. He had no idea of the war I'd just been through, of the chasm that separated me and my only living relative. He just saw a potential solution, a name on a family tree. My phone buzzed in my lap with a calendar alert. RSVP by the 15th. It was today. I ignored it and looked at the doctor, my heart a stone in my chest. He took a deep breath before he spoke, unaware that he was about to hand me the world's most twisted, impossible grenade. Sarah, he said, his voice steady. We need to get your sister in for testing. Based on the genetic markers we have from you, there's a strong probability. We need to test Jessica right away. She might be Lily's only hope. The doctor's words hung in the sterile air of the office. She might be Lily's only hope. It was like he'd offered me a lifeline made of razor wire. The one person on the planet who had made it explicitly, cruelly clear that my daughter's life was an inconvenience was now being presented as her potential savior. The irony was so thick I felt like I was choking on it. I drove home in a daze, the traffic on the freeway blurring into a meaningless stream of red and white lights. How could I even ask her? How could I go back to that person, crawl on my hands and knees, and beg for a piece of her body after she wouldn't even give me a piece of her wealth? When I got home, the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Lily was staying with my neighbor for a few hours, a small mercy. I walked into the kitchen and my eyes landed on the gold-foiled invitation still propped up against the fruit bowl. Please RSVP by the 15th. Today. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over Jessica's name. My pride, my anger, my hurt, they all screamed at me to throw the phone against the wall, to let it go. But then I pictured Lily's pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her little hand felt so fragile in mine. My pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. My anger was a weight that would sink us both. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pressed the call button. She answered with a clipped, "Hello?" Her wedding planner voice. "Jessica, it's me," I said, my voice flat. "Look, Sarah, if this is about the money again, I've already told you." "It's not about the money," I cut her off, the words tasting like ash. "It's about Lily. The treatment isn't working. She needs a bone marrow transplant. There was a brief silence on the other end. For a fleeting second, I allowed myself to hope that a flicker of humanity, of sisterly concern, might surface. "Oh," was all she said. Just, "Oh." Then, "Well, I hope they find a donor for her soon." It was so dismissive, so utterly detached, it almost broke me right there. "That's why I'm calling, Jessica," I said, forcing the words out. "They've searched the registry. There are no matches. The doctors say the best chance is a full sibling." I paused, letting the implication hang between us. When she didn't respond, I had to spell it out. "They need to test you, Jess. You might be her only match, her only hope." The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. I could hear the faint sound of music in the background, something classical and upbeat. She was probably getting a final dress fitting or approving the seating chart. Finally, she sighed. A long put-upon sound that scraped against my last nerve. "Sarah, you cannot be serious. A bone marrow transplant. Do you have any idea what that involves? It's a surgical procedure. I'd have to go under anesthesia. I'd have to take time off work to recover." "You don't have a job, Jessica," I snapped before I could stop myself. "Mark takes care of everything." "I have obligations," she retorted, her voice rising. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. I have my final fitting, the rehearsal dinner, a bachelorette weekend in Vegas, then the honeymoon in Bora Bora for a month. The recovery time. It would interfere with everything. I could get scars. What would I look like in my bikini?" I felt a cold, calm clarity wash over me. It was the kind of calm that comes when you've hit rock bottom and realize there's no further to fall. I wasn't talking to a sister. I wasn't even talking to a human being with a normal capacity for empathy. I was talking to a monster of selfishness, cocooned in a world of privilege so thick that the cries of a dying child couldn't penetrate it. "So, your bikini body, for your honeymoon," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "is more important than your niece's life. Is that what you're telling me?" "Don't you dare twist my words," she shrieked. "This is an incredibly stressful time for me. You are being so selfish trying to lay this on me right now. It's not my fault Lily is sick. Why should I have to ruin the most important event of my life because of it?" That was it. The final thread of hope, of sisterly connection, of shared history, snapped. It severed completely, leaving behind a clean, cold void. "Okay," I said. The single word was so devoid of emotion it seemed to startle her. "Okay, what?" she asked, a note of suspicion in her voice. "Okay, I understand," I said. "Thank you for making it clear where you stand. I won't bother you again. Enjoy your wedding." And I hung up. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I sat at my kitchen table, the gold invitation gleaming at me, and I felt nothing but a hollowed-out emptiness. A plan began to form in my mind, a dark, desperate seed planted in the barren soil of my despair. I picked up the RSVP card. Meal choice, filet mignon or pan-seared salmon. Below it was a space for the number of guests attending. I picked up a pen, my hand steady, and wrote a single digit. 1. Then I slid it into the pre-addressed postage-paid envelope and walked out to my mailbox. I dropped it in and heard the soft thud as it landed inside. It was the sound of a declaration of war. The next 3 weeks were a living hell. Lily was readmitted to the hospital. The doctors started a harsh round of chemotherapy in a desperate attempt to buy her more time while they expanded the donor search internationally. I lived at the hospital, sleeping in a vinyl recliner that smelled of antiseptic, my world shrinking to the 4 beige walls of her room. I lost track of time. Days and nights blurred into a continuous cycle of beeping monitors, hushed doctor consultations, and holding a bucket for my daughter, as the chemo ravaged her tiny body. I didn't hear a word from Jessica. Not a text, not a call. My RSVP had been received, and apparently my single acceptance required no further comment. The day of the wedding arrived. It was a beautiful, sunny Saturday in Napa. I knew this because I saw pictures on social media from some of our mutual cousins who had posted about the fairy tale weekend. I sat in the dim hospital room, scrolling through images of champagne flutes and floral arches under the hashtag, "May Mark and Jess tie the knot." There was my sister, radiant in a dress that probably cost more than my car, laughing without a care in the world. Meanwhile, Lily was asleep, her breathing shallow, an IV line snaking into her thin arm. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my aunt. "Where are you?" Jessica is asking. "The ceremony is about to start." I typed back a single sentence, exactly where I need to be. Then I put my phone on silent, put on the nice black dress I'd brought from home, and reapplied my lipstick. I kissed Lily's forehead. "I'll be back soon, sweetie," I whispered. "Mommy just has to do something." I walked out of the hospital, got into my car, and started driving north towards Napa. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to yell or scream. I had the RSVP card in my purse, proof that I was an invited guest. I was going to do what my sister had so coldly requested. I was going to attend her wedding. The drive to Napa was surreal. The sun was setting, painting the rolling hills in shades of orange and gold. It was offensively beautiful. Every vineyard I passed, every luxury car that zipped by me, felt like a personal insult. It was the backdrop for my sister's fairy tale, a world away from the sterile, beeping reality I had just left. I pulled up to the Grand Estate, a sprawling Spanish-style villa surrounded by acres of perfectly manicured vines. Valets in crisp white shirts were rushing to open doors. I handed one my keys to my 10-year-old sedan, feeling its shabbiness like a brand. It was nestled between a Porsche and a Maserati. I could hear the string quartet from the parking lot. The ceremony was over. The guests were mingling on a massive stone terrace, cocktails in hand. The air buzzed with laughter and expensive perfume. I walked through the grand archway, my simple black dress a stark contrast to the sea of pastel silks and designer's suits. A few heads turned. Cousins and old family friends looked at me with a mixture of surprise and pity. I saw my Aunt Carol making a beeline for me, her face a mask of worried concern. "Sarah, oh my goodness, we were so worried. Jessica said you weren't coming." "Plans changed," I said, my voice smooth and even, a stranger's voice. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, the bubbles fizzing against my tongue. I needed the liquid courage. I spotted them holding court near a massive floral arrangement that was bigger than my car. Jessica was breathtaking, a vision in white lace. Mark stood beside her, his arm possessively around her waist, a smug, satisfied smile on his face. They were laughing, accepting congratulations, the perfect couple on their perfect day. As I approached, Jessica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face before she quickly replaced it with a bright, manufactured grin. "Sarah, you made it," she exclaimed, her voice loud enough for everyone around them to hear. She hugged me, a stiff, air-kissing embrace that was all for show. "I was so worried you wouldn't be here." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, my voice dripping with a sweetness that was pure acid. Mark just nodded at me, a curt, dismissive gesture. He didn't even bother to feign pleasure. His eyes scanned the crowd, already looking for someone more important to talk to. I spent the next hour playing the part. I made small talk with relatives who asked about Lily with hushed, concerned voices. I'd give them the sanitized version, "she's a fighter," and change the subject. I ate a crab cake. I listened to the speeches. Jessica's maid of honor talked about her huge, generous heart. I nearly choked on my champagne. Mark's best man told a story about a multi-million-dollar deal Mark closed, holding it up as an example of his unflinching, decisive character. It was all I could do not to stand up and scream. The entire event was a monument to their selfishness, a grand, opulent performance of a life devoid of any real substance. Finally, the band started up, and the guests were herded into a grand ballroom that looked like something out of a Disney movie. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, and every table was groaning under the weight of more flowers and candles. My place card was at a table in the back, near the kitchen with distant cousins and Mark's awkward co-worker. It was a deliberate, petty slight, and I almost had to admire the thoroughness of their cruelty. I sat through the first course, pushing a scallop around my plate. Then I saw my moment. A microphone was set up on the stage. The best man had just used it for his toast. Now it stood silent, waiting. It was time. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I picked up my champagne glass and walked towards the stage. A few people watched me, curious. Jessica and Mark were at the head table, laughing at something his father had said. They didn't see me coming. I stepped up onto the low stage and took the microphone out of its stand. The slight feedback screech made everyone turn and look. The room fell silent. 150 pairs of eyes were on me. Jessica's smile vanished. Mark's face hardened. "Hi, everyone," I said, my voice amplified, echoing through the cavernous room. It was steady, clear. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah, Jessica's older sister." I raised my glass. "I'd like to propose a toast." Jessica was trying to signal the wedding planner, a frantic, subtle flick of her eyes. It was too late. I had the floor. They say a wedding is a celebration of love, of family, and of two lives coming together. And looking around this beautiful room, at this incredible, breathtaking celebration, I am just blown away by the sheer scale of it all. $250,000. It's an amazing figure, isn't it? The cost of a small house. The kind of money that could, I don't know, change a life, or even save one. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Jessica's face was ashen. Mark looked like he wanted to physically drag me off the stage. I'm not here to talk about my daughter, Lily, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Even though she's lying in a hospital bed right now, fighting for her life. And I'm certainly not here to talk about the fact that she needs a bone marrow transplant. And her Aunt Jessica, my beautiful sister, the woman with the huge, generous heart, is her only potential match but refused to even get tested because it would interfere with her honeymoon plans. Gasps erupted around the room. The silence was shattered. My Aunt Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Mark was on his feet now, his face purple with rage. "That's enough," he bellowed. "I'm not finished," I said calmly into the microphone, my eyes locked on my sister's. "No, I'm not here to talk about any of that, because today is a happy day. So instead I want to talk about family, and about choices. I want to toast the happy couple. To Mark and Jessica, who have taught me the true value of money, and the true cost of family." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. And then I reached into my purse and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. It was a printout of an email from Dr. Evans's office, confirming the lab appointment for HLA typing that I had scheduled for Jessica 3 weeks ago, and the follow-up email confirming she never showed up. It wasn't just my word against hers. It was proof. I let the microphone drop. It clattered on the stage, the feedback screaming through the speakers like a banshee. In the stunned, horrified silence, I walked off the stage, past the rows of speechless guests, and straight towards the exit. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the inferno I had just ignited burning behind me. I had RSVP'd, I had attended, and I had given them a wedding gift they would never, ever forget. I was halfway to my car when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello? Is this Sarah?" a man's voice asked, sounding urgent and professional. "Yes, this is she. This is Dr. Miller from the transplant coordination team at the hospital. I'm so sorry to bother you this late, but we need you and your sister to come in. Immediately." My blood ran cold. "What? Why? Is it Lily? Is she okay?" "Lily is stable," he said quickly. "It's not about Lily. It's about Mark, your sister's new husband. There's been an accident." "An accident?" The words felt foreign, nonsensical. I was still running on the adrenaline from my speech, my heart hammering from the confrontation. The doctor's calm, clinical tone was a jarring shift from the emotional inferno I had just left behind. "What kind of accident? What happened?" I stood frozen in the opulent venue's parking lot, the sound of the string quartet now replaced by the frantic ringing in my own ears. "I'm afraid I can't give you details over the phone, ma'am," Dr. Miller said. "But he was brought into our ER about 30 minutes ago. It's very serious. We have your sister listed as his next of kin, but we can't reach her. Your number was also in his emergency contacts. Can you get here?" My mind was reeling. An accident. Mark. Here? Now? It made no sense. He was just on his feet, his face contorted in rage, ready to throttle me. What could have possibly happened in the 15 minutes since I walked out? Yes, of course. I'm on my way, I stammered, my legs finally unfreezing. I fumbled for my car keys, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of questions. Did he have a heart attack from the sheer shock of it all? Did he trip down the grand staircase in his fury? I pictured him collapsing, the chaos that must have erupted the second I left. My dramatic exit had just become the prologue to a much bigger, darker tragedy. The drive to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and the blare of my own thoughts. The same hospital where my daughter was sleeping just a few floors above the emergency room. The universe had a sick, twisted sense of humor. I ran into the ER, the smell of antiseptic and panic, a familiar assault on my senses. A nurse pointed me toward a private waiting room. And there was Jessica. She was still in her magnificent $250,000 wedding gown, but it was crumpled and stained with dirt and what looked horrifically like blood. Her perfect hair was a mess, mascara streaking down her ashen face. She was huddled in a chair, shivering, her father and Mark's parents flanking her like statues of grief. She looked up as I entered, and for the first time in years I saw something other than selfishness in her eyes. I saw raw, undiluted terror. Her father, a man I'd always found to be quietly complicit in Jessica's entitlement, stood up and intercepted me before I could get to her. "Sarah, thank God." His voice was hoarse. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. After your speech," he began, his eyes avoiding mine. "Mark was enraged. He went after you. He ran out of the ballroom, screaming your name. None of us could stop him. He got in his car, that sports car of his, and peeled out of the driveway. He must have been doing over 100. He lost control on the main road, just a mile from the venue. He hit an oak tree." He paused, his voice cracking. "They had to use the jaws of life to get him out." The air left my lungs. He had been coming after me. The rage I had ignited in him, the public humiliation, had sent him careening to his own destruction. A wave of nausea washed over me. I looked over at Jessica, who was now sobbing into her hands, her whole body shaking. The sight of her, so utterly broken, should have brought me some sense of vindictive satisfaction. My righteous anger had been vindicated in the most horrific way imaginable, but all I felt was a cold, hollow pit in my stomach. This wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to shame her, to expose her. I never wanted this. A doctor in blue scrubs came in, his face grim. It was Dr. Miller. He looked at the assembled family, his eyes grave. "Mr. Harrison is out of surgery," he said. "We've managed to stabilize him for now, but I need to be frank with you. His injuries are catastrophic. Massive internal bleeding, multiple organ systems are failing. His spleen ruptured, and we've had to remove it. But the biggest issue is his kidneys. They've both been severely damaged by the blunt force trauma. They're not functioning. At all." Mark's mother let out a strangled cry. "What does that mean?" Mark's father asked, his voice shaking. "It means he needs an immediate kidney transplant," the doctor said bluntly. "He's not stable enough for long-term dialysis. Without a new kidney in the next 24 to 48 hours, he will not survive. We've already put him at the top of the national transplant list, but finding a match for his blood type O negative on such short notice is a lottery. O negative, the universal donor, but also a patient who could only receive from another O negative." The room fell silent, the weight of the doctor's words pressing down on us all. Then Jessica lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed and wild. "Me," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Test me. I'm O negative. I can give him my kidney." The doctor gave her a sympathetic but professional look. "Ma'am, we can certainly test you, but as his wife, you understand that even with a matching blood type, there are other compatibility factors. HLA markers, the same things we look for in bone marrow transplants. It's a long shot. HLA markers, the same words Dr. Evans had used for Lily." My blood ran cold. I watched as a nurse came in to draw Jessica's blood for the compatibility test. Jessica held out her arm, the lace sleeve of her wedding dress pushed up, revealing pale, trembling skin. She was finally willing to be a donor. Finally willing to endure a surgical procedure, to scar her precious body, to sacrifice a piece of herself. But not for her dying niece, for the man who bankrolled her lifestyle. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat, but I choked it down. I stood in the corner, an invisible ghost at this new, horrific family drama. I was the catalyst, the villain who had set this all in motion. After they took Jessica's blood, I slipped out of the room and went upstairs to Lily's floor. The hallway was quiet, the lights dimmed. I peeked into her room. She was sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. For a moment, watching her, the chaos downstairs felt like a bad dream. I just wanted to crawl into the recliner and wake up to find this was all a nightmare. My phone buzzed. It was Dr. Miller. I stepped back into the hallway to answer it. "Sarah, can you come back down to the ER waiting room? We've got the initial results from Jessica's compatibility test." "That was fast," I said, surprised. "Yes, well, we put a rush on it. We're cross-referencing against our existing donor and patient databases." He paused, and his next words made the world tilt on its axis. "Sarah, something has come up. Something we need to discuss with you and your sister together. It's about Lily." My heart seized. Lily? What does this have to do with Lily? My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Mark's accident, Jessica's kidney test, and my daughter. The pieces didn't fit. "Please just come down," Dr. Miller urged, his professional calm doing little to soothe the frantic panic clawing its way up my throat. I flew back down the stairs, my sneakers silent on the linoleum, my mind a screaming chaos. Was Lily worse? Had something happened while I was gone? I burst back into the private waiting room. The atmosphere was thick with a new kind of tension. Mark's parents were gone, likely at his ICU bedside. It was just Jessica, her father, and me, a fractured family portrait under the harsh fluorescent lights. Dr. Miller stood in the center of the room, holding a tablet. He looked from me to Jessica, his expression unreadable. "We've run the preliminary cross-match for Jessica and Mark," he began, his voice measured. "As we suspected, despite the matching blood type, she is not a compatible kidney donor for her husband. The HLA mismatch is too significant. The risk of rejection would be almost certain." Jessica let out a broken sob, her last desperate hope extinguished. She slumped in her chair, the magnificent white dress now looking like a tragic costume. Her father put a comforting hand on her shoulder, but she seemed oblivious. But I was barely listening to the news about Mark. I was focused on the second part of what the doctor had said. He had run a cross-match against their databases. "What does this have to do with Lily?" I demanded, my voice sharp. Dr. Miller turned his gaze to me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something other than clinical detachment in his eyes. It looked like pity. "When we ran Jessica's HLA profile, we ran it against our entire hospital patient database, as is standard procedure in urgent transplant cases. We're always looking for potential matches, and we found one. A perfect one. 10 out of 10 antigen match." He paused, letting the words sink in. My mind refused to process it. A perfect match. For who? "A match for who?" Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. Dr. Miller looked directly at her. "For your niece," he said softly. "Jessica, your HLA type is a perfect match for Lily's. You're the bone marrow donor we've been searching for." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of hospital machinery. It was the punchline to the cruelest joke in the world. The miracle that Lily needed, the one I had begged and pleaded for, the one Jessica had so callously refused to even consider, was not just a possibility. It was a certainty. She was the one. Her body held the literal key to my daughter's life. Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief, then a dawning horror. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. All the anger, the resentment, the hatred that had been simmering between us for months, for years, suddenly coalesced into this single, impossible moment. "So," I said, the word coming out as a dry, rasping sound, "let me get this straight. You can't save your husband, the man you just married, the man whose life you were willing to sacrifice your precious kidney for. But you can save my daughter." Jessica flinched as if I'd slapped her. "Sarah, She started, but no other words came. What could she possibly say? "It's a miracle," her father breathed, looking from her to me with a desperate, pleading expression. "Jessica, this is a sign. You have to do this. For Lily. For our family." "Family?" I laughed, a bitter, ugly sound that echoed in the small room. "Don't you dare talk to me about family. Family doesn't let a 9-year-old girl waste away because it might interfere with a trip to Bora Bora. Family doesn't offer a $500 GoFundMe donation when they're spending 500 times that on a party." I turned my full attention to my sister, who was now weeping openly, her face buried in her hands. The pristine white dress was a mockery. "You had your choice, Jessica," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the tile floor. "You made it very clear what was important to you. Your wedding, your honeymoon, your perfect carefree life. You didn't want the inconvenience. Well, congratulations. The inconvenience is still here, but the choice is no longer yours to make." Dr. Miller cleared his throat, stepping forward cautiously. "Sarah, this is wonderful news for Lily. We can schedule the procedure immediately. We can start the donation process as early as tomorrow morning." I looked at him, then back at the pathetic, sobbing figure of my sister. And in that moment, I understood the power I now held. It was a terrible, dizzying power. The tables hadn't just turned. The entire game had been flipped upside down. Jessica looked up at me, her eyes swollen and pleading. "Sarah, please," she begged. I know I was wrong. I was horrible. But Mark, he's dying. Please, just tell them you'll do it. Tell them I'll be the donor." Her words barely registered. A new thought, cold and clear and sharp as a shard of ice, was forming in my mind. A thought born of weeks of pain and desperation. "Is Mark still on the transplant list for a kidney?" I asked Dr. Miller, my gaze never leaving my sister's face. "Yes, of course," he said, looking confused. "He's at the very top of the list for any O-negative kidney that becomes available in this region." "And who manages that list?" I pressed. "Who makes the final decision when a donor organ becomes available and there are multiple potential recipients?" "Well, the transplant board does," he said. "Based on a number of factors: urgency, compatibility, patient stability. But the head of the transplant board has the final say. He glanced at his tablet. That would be Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans, Lily's oncologist. The man who had looked me in the eye and told me my sister was my daughter's only hope. The man who knew every detail of our family's agonizing story. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I looked at Jessica, at her tear-streaked face, at the ruin of her perfect day. The power to save her husband was no longer in her hands. It was in mine. "No," I said, my voice ringing with a finality that made even the doctor take a step back. Jessica's head shot up, her eyes wide with confusion and terror. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I repeated, savoring the word. "You will not be donating your bone marrow to my daughter, not today, not tomorrow, not until I get what I want." A stunned silence fell over the room. Jessica stared at me, her face a mask of utter disbelief. Even her father, who had been trying to play peacemaker, looked at me as if I had grown a second head. Dr. Miller was the first to speak, his professional demeanor strained. "Sarah, I don't think you understand. This is the chance we've been waiting for. This is Lily's cure. We need to move on this. We can't delay." "Oh, I understand perfectly, doctor," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. I walked closer to my sister, circling her chair like a predator. She flinched, pulling the blood-stained folds of her wedding dress tighter around her. "You see, for the last 3 months, I have been powerless. I have been a beggar. I pleaded for money, and I was offered prayers. I pleaded for a simple blood test, and I was offered excuses about a bachelorette party. I watched my daughter get sicker and sicker, while my own sister debated the merits of different shades of ivory for her tablecloths. I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers. I could smell the faint, cloying scent of her expensive wedding perfume mixed with the metallic tang of fear. "You held all the cards, Jessica, and you chose to let my daughter die. Now it seems the deck has been reshuffled. I hold the cards, and I'm not just talking about Lily's life. I'm talking about your husband's." Jessica's eyes darted towards Dr. Miller, a desperate, silent appeal for him to intervene. But the doctor remained silent, watching the scene unfold with a grim fascination. He was a medical professional, but he was also a man who had witnessed my private agony for months. "What do you want, Sarah?" my father asked, his voice trembling. "Money? Is that what this is about?" I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Money? You think this is about money now? No. This is about justice. This is about leverage. For the first time, I have something my sister wants, desperately." I straightened up and addressed Dr. Miller directly. "I am Lily's sole legal guardian. I make all of her medical decisions. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct," he confirmed, his voice cautious. "And as her guardian, I am refusing consent for the bone marrow transplant from this donor," I said, gesturing vaguely at Jessica. "We will continue to wait for a donor from the National Registry. Sarah, that could take months, years. Lily doesn't have that kind of time," he protested, the doctor in him overriding the spectator. "That is my decision to make," I stated, my voice leaving no room for argument. I then turned my full attention back to Jessica. Her face was a wreck, tears carving clean paths through her makeup. The terror had been replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. She was finally starting to understand the game. "Mark is on a list," I said slowly, laying out my terms. "A list for a kidney. A list that is overseen by Dr. Evans, Lily's doctor, a man who has a great deal of sympathy for my situation, a man who knows exactly what you did." Her breath hitched. The pieces were clicking into place in her mind, forming a picture of a nightmare she couldn't have imagined just hours ago. "You can't," she whispered. "You wouldn't." "Wouldn't I?" I shot back. "Would I let a man die to save my own child? Let me think. You were willing to let my child die to save your vacation plans. So, yes, I think the scales are pretty clear on that front. Here's my offer, Jessica. It's very simple. You want to save your husband, then you are going to help me." "How?" she choked out. "I'll do anything. I'll give her the marrow. I'll do it right now." "No," I said, shaking my head. "It's too late for that. My consent is not for sale for something you should have done as a human being months ago. You are going to do so much more. You are going to sign over a controlling interest in Mark's company to a trust in Lily's name. You are going to liquidate your assets, the cars, the jewelry, the house in Napa, and put every single penny into a foundation for families of children with aplastic anemia. You are going to publicly dedicate that foundation to the niece you almost let die. You are going to give up everything you value, just like I was about to lose everything I value. She stared at me, speechless. Her father stepped forward. "Sarah, this is insane. You're extorting her." "I'm negotiating," I corrected him calmly, "from a position of strength, something she taught me all about. When and only when I have legally binding documents in my hand, proving that all of this is done, I will have a little chat with Dr. Evans. I will explain that you've had a miraculous change of heart. I will suggest that should an O-negative kidney become available, your husband, the newfound philanthropist, might be a very worthy recipient. And then, and only then, will I consent to you donating your bone marrow to Lily." It was monstrous. It was blackmail, pure and simple, and it was the most power I had ever felt in my entire life. I was dictating the terms of 2 lives, holding them in the palm of my hand. I was becoming the very thing I had hated, cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless, and it felt like breathing after being held underwater for months. "You have 24 hours to get your lawyers to draw up the paperwork, Jessica," I said, turning to leave. "The clock is ticking. For Mark, and for Lily." I walked out of the waiting room, leaving the wreckage of my sister's life behind me. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt empty. I had won. I had the leverage to save Lily and ruin the people who had wronged me. But the cost was a piece of my own soul. As I walked down the sterile hospital corridor, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but it wasn't the hospital's exchange. I answered cautiously. "Hello?" A man's voice, cold and clipped, spoke on the other end. It was a voice I recognized from the wedding speeches. "This is Stephen Harrison," he said. "Mark's father. I have a proposition for you." My stomach clenched. "I'm not interested in anything you have to say." "Oh, I think you will be," he said, and there was a chilling confidence in his tone. "I've just spoken with my son's legal team. It seems that shortly after their engagement, my son had your sister sign a rather comprehensive prenuptial agreement. If he dies, she gets a modest settlement, but she inherits nothing. No assets, no company, no control. You're trying to blackmail a woman who has absolutely nothing to give you." The cold, hard words of Mark's father hit me with the force of a physical blow. "She has absolutely nothing to give you." For a moment the sterile hospital corridor seemed to tilt, the floor dropping out from under me. My intricate, vengeful plan, my entire fortress of leverage, had been built on a foundation of sand. I had been threatening a queen who was already in checkmate, a pauper in a palace. My power, which had felt so absolute just seconds before, evaporated into nothing. I was back to being a beggar, but this time I had shown my teeth, revealing a ruthlessness that had gained me nothing. "What do you want?" I finally managed to say, my voice a hollow echo of its former confidence. "A deal," Stephen Harrison said, his tone all business. "I don't like you, Sarah. I find what you did at my son's wedding, and what you just tried to do to your sister, to be utterly contemptible. But my son is dying, and as it happens, your daughter needs something that is, for the moment, attached to my daughter-in-law. We have a mutual problem." I listened, my mind numb as he laid it out. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution of terms. Jessica would donate her bone marrow to Lily. The procedure would be scheduled for the following day. In exchange, I would speak to Dr. Evans. I would use whatever shred of goodwill I had to advocate for Mark's place on the transplant list. There would be no transfer of assets, no foundation, no public atonement, just a simple, cold transaction. A life for a chance at a life. "And if I refuse?" I asked, a last flicker of defiance stirring within me. "If you refuse," he said, his voice dropping to a glacial calm, "I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure the transplant board sees you as what you are. An unstable, vindictive woman attempting to extort a grieving family. I will paint a picture of you holding your own daughter's life hostage. I will have you declared an unfit guardian. Dr. Evans's sympathy will evaporate when he's faced with a team of my lawyers. Your daughter will get no transplant and my son will die. But I assure you, you will lose everything. Is that clear?" It was perfectly clear. I had been outmaneuvered by a master of the game. I had tried to play chess with a king, and he had simply swept all the pieces off the board. "Yes," I whispered. "It's clear." The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I signed the consent forms, my signature a testament to my defeat. I avoided Jessica, who was a ghost haunting the ICU waiting room, her eyes empty and vacant. I sat by Lily's bedside, holding her hand, and felt the crushing weight of my failure. I had tried to win justice for her, and in the end, all I had managed to secure was the very thing I should have had from the beginning, but at the cost of my own morality. I had my talk with Dr. Evans. I told him that Jessica had seen the error of her ways and was desperate to make amends. He listened, his face impassive, and simply said he would take it under advisement. There was no warmth, no sympathy. I could see Stephen Harrison's lawyers reflected in his professional gaze. The transplant happened. It was an anticlimax of sterile procedures and quiet waiting. Jessica was wheeled into one room, Lily into another. A bag of precious, life-giving cells was carried between the two, a physical manifestation of the fraught, ugly bond that connected them. For weeks we existed in a state of suspended animation. Lily was in isolation, her immune system completely wiped out, waiting to see if her aunt's cells would find a new home and begin to grow. I watched the numbers on her blood tests with a hawk's intensity, each slight increase in her white blood cell count a victory, each dip a terrifying plunge. During that time, news came from the ICU. An O-negative kidney had become available from a car accident victim. Mark Harrison got the transplant. My advocacy hadn't mattered. His father's influence, his money, and his son's critical state had put him at the top of the list. He had won, just as he said he would. 2 months after the transplant, Lily was allowed to come home. Her hair was starting to grow back in soft, downy tufts. Color was returning to her cheeks. She was weak, but she was alive. The doctors used the word remission with cautious optimism. My little girl, my entire world, had been given back to me. It felt like a dream. About a week after we got home, there was a knock on the door. It was Jessica. I hadn't seen her since the day of the transplant. She looked different. She was thinner, the defiant glamour gone, replaced by a quiet exhaustion. She wasn't wearing designer clothes, just simple jeans and a sweater. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice soft. I hesitated, then stepped aside. We sat in my living room, the silence between us heavy with unspoken things. Finally she spoke. "Mark is recovering," she said. "He's being moved to a rehab facility next week. His father is overseeing everything." She looked down at her hands. "I'm leaving him." I was stunned. "What? Why?" "Because of the prenup," she said with a wry, tired smile. "Stephen Harrison was right. I have nothing. The second Mark is stable, I'll be served with divorce papers. The settlement is just enough to live on for a year or two, if I'm careful. The life I had, it's over." She looked up, and her eyes were clear, the first time I had seen them without the filter of wealth and entitlement. "That night in the hospital," she said, "when you laid out your terms, you were right. I had become a monster. I had traded my soul for a lifestyle, and I didn't even notice. When Mark's father told me about the prenup, that I was worthless without Mark's money, it was like waking up. I finally saw that I had nothing because I was nothing. I had no value of my own." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small stuffed elephant. "This is for Lily," she said, her voice cracking. "I know it's not enough. I know sorry is a pathetic word for what I did. But I hope one day you'll let me be her aunt again. For real, this time." I looked at the elephant, then at my sister. The rage I had carried for so long was gone, burned out of me by fear and desperation. All that was left was a deep, bone-weary sadness for what we had lost. I hadn't gotten my grand cinematic justice. The villains hadn't been vanquished in a blaze of glory. Mark and his father still had their empire. But my sister had lost hers, and in losing it, she had perhaps found something real. And I had my daughter back. That was the only victory that ever truly mattered. "She'd like that," I said, taking the elephant. "She's sleeping now, but you can come back tomorrow. You can come back any time." A single tear traced a path down Jessica's cheek, but for the first time it wasn't a tear of self-pity. It was a tear of gratitude. And as she left, I knew our story wasn't over. But a new, quieter, and more hopeful chapter was finally beginning.